change the nature of human beings. This is the notion of white privilege that we keep hearing, particularly on college campuses from the left. And that notion, of course, is utter nonsense. The Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States, they're founded on universal principles that apply to everybody, the principles that we just discussed. Just because human beings have come up short in the past in the United States, and of course they have, of course there's been discrimination against blacks and women and gays and Jews, of course that's true. That doesn't mean right now America is irredeemably racist or institutionally racist. Crime rates across different racial groups in the United States are crime rates not because America is this evil society that causes crime rates to happen. It's because there are individuals within society who are disproportionately grouped in certain areas who commit crimes. There's a very easy way not to go to jail. You worry about the criminal justice system being biased against black people, there's a very easy solution. Fewer black people should commit crimes. I know that sounds rough, but as individuals in a free society, that is the way things work. No one is forcing anybody else to commit a crime. If you want to avoid, you want to look at disproportionate rates of poverty. People like to attribute this to white privilege. Disproportionate rates of poverty are almost solely caused by the largest indicator, anyway, of intergenerational poverty, single motherhood. It's not white privilege that is causing black people to knock up other black people. It isn't. By the way, it's not white privilege causing white people to knock up other white people. The fact is that those rates have been increasing dramatically since the 1960s, and in those communities, poverty is sky high. And again, that has nothing to do with race. I mean, the fact is that 7% of black two-parent families are living in poverty today in the United States. 22% of white single-parent families are living in poverty in the United States. What happened to white privilege? Wouldn't you think that the white privilege system would have somehow found a way to benefit the white single mother? The answer is no, because again, individual decisions in a free society are generally responsible for the individual result. So, the notion that human nature can be cured only by a shift in society, that's something that the left believes, and therefore all blame lies with the system. And that's a pretty seductive idea, particularly for people who want to seize the society and use it for revenge. Right? And that's really what so much of politics has become now. You want to use the government as a giant club to wield in revenge at particular political groups, at particular identity groups. The left's solution to white privilege is government redistributionism, a new governmental system. If we were ever able to overcome the need for basic human resources, we'd all be great. And this is why you see, for example, Barack Obama and his administration actually suggested that the solution to ISIS was to give them jobs. Right? The reason that ISIS was murdering people wasn't because there are a bunch of people in ISIS who believe evil things and murder people. It's because they don't have jobs. It's because they live in a corrupt system. And if the system were just the secular humanistic system of Barack Obama with some high progressive tax rates and some solid bureaucratic jobs available for people who chop off people's heads, everything would be fine in ISIS land. The left also doesn't believe in the sort of founding notion of rights for individuals absent intervention. They believe that rights actually spring from the collective. So you only have a right to do a thing because the collective says you have the right to do a thing. It doesn't adhere to you as an individual from God. Instead, it comes from the state. They think that rights did not exist before government. Human beings don't have individual rights. We have things that the collective gives us. If we harm the collective, the rights disappear. And so the question becomes not what right do you have. It becomes not what right does the government have to invade your right to own an AR-15. The question instead becomes what right do you have to own an AR-15? The burden of proof is on you, the individual, to prove that you have a right. It's not on the collective to demonstrate why they should be allowed to invade your right. Right? This is why the left likes the French Revolution, because the French Declaration of the Rights of Man says, quote, "No body nor individual may exercise any authority which does not proceed directly from the nation. You cross the nation, you're in serious trouble." Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg feels the same way. She says that if she had to create a constitution for a new country, she wouldn't use the Constitution of the United States. She says the South African Constitution is better, because it was a deliberate attempt to have a fundamental instrument of government that embraced basic human rights. What are those rights? Rights that come from the collective: the right to food, the right to housing, the right to health care and water and social assistance. But of course, those aren't rights. You have to make somebody do something in order to get those things. My wife is a doctor. You don't have a right to her health care. You don't. You have a right to access her health care if you can pay for it and she agrees to it, but you don't have a right to her health care. That's tyranny. It's involuntary servitude. You can't put a gun to my wife's head and tell her that she needs to care for you. But the left believes you can. When they say right to health care, that's what they mean. Because all rights spring from the collective, and my wife doesn't have the right to say as an individual, I don't want to do this. Only these rights, these positive rights, is what the left calls positive rights, as opposed to negative rights. Negative rights like the right to free speech, meaning that you don't get to invade my right to free speech. The left believes not in negative rights, they believe in positive rights, the right that you have to take something away from somebody else. Obama said the same thing. In 2001, he openly said he regretted that the Constitution was a charter of negative liberties. He hoped that the Constitution could be twisted in favor of these positive rights. And this is, by the way, what the left terms social justice, the idea that all rights spring from the collective. Right? If the collective trumps the individual identity doesn't mean anything. All that matters is the collective. You're not an individual responsible for your own behavior. You're a member of a group. You're either a member of a victimizing group or a member of a victimized group. If you're a member of a victim group, you have every collective right to steal from people who are in the victimizing group. Right? This is Mark Lamont Hill, who's a professor at Morehouse College. You see him on Fox News and CNN all the time. He says this means that only powerful people can be held accountable for social injustice. He says black people, for example, are not capable of racism. It is impossible for a black person to be racist. Now, that contradicts the evidence, which is that there are black people who are racist, obviously. In fact, there's a Pew poll from 2013, a Rasmussen poll from 2013, showing that more blacks thought that a majority of blacks were racist than thought a majority of whites were racist. So blacks fully acknowledge that some black people are racist, right? Just like whites fully acknowledge that some white people are racist. But the idea that blacks are incapable of racism, this springs from this social justice idea that you are a member of a collective group, you're not an individual responsible for your own behavior. Okay, finally, the left disagrees about responsibilities from human beings. To the left, the only responsibility you have is not to your neighbor, it's not to your family, it's not to your friends, it's to the state. Not just in terms of work or output, but in terms of allegiance. All allegiance to principle, that's meaningless. Allegiance to God, to family, that's an obstacle to your allegiance to the state. This is why all socialist states eventually try to abolish the church, because that's an obstacle. That's something you believe in, but it's not the state. You have no responsibility for your own action because you're a product of the system. You're not perfect. You'll never be perfect so long as we haven't achieved social utopia. Personal responsibility is an extension of white privilege. Freedom in the Western sense is a way of enshrining the status quo. What is real liberty? Real liberty is being able to do whatever you want and then blaming it on society, so long as you say you bear allegiance to society. President Obama, in his second inaugural address, here's what he said. He said, being true to our founding documents does not mean we all define liberty in exactly the same way. This is the same sort of thing that Justice Anthony Kennedy, who was single-handedly responsible for redefining the Constitution, he said, quote, at the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of existence, of meaning, of the universe, and of the mystery of human life, which is rather vague language. But this means that liberty has no real definition outside of stuff I want. Right? Liberty can be anything. Liberty can be this tree. Right? Liberty can be this orange. Liberty can be your car. And we all want to do different stuff, sometimes at the expense of other people's liberty. The left wants subjective definitions of liberty, because if you and I define liberty differently, the only body capable of bridging that gap is the government telling everybody what to do. If I define liberty as something and you define liberty as something, the only thing that matters is what the government defines liberty as, because that's where you get your liberty in the first place. This is why colleges feel the need to police political correctness. Right? The phrase political correctness comes directly from Chairman Mao, seriously. It means that you have to be in line with what the state wants you to think. When your responsibility lies only to the collective, lying is okay so long as you're serving the collective. Cheating is okay. All of that is fine. And those who contradict you, they're the bad guys for challenging your view, for hurting your feelings.
I'm a leftist, so
well, thank you for coming. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. My brother's actually a big fan. He's up there.
So do you guys punch each other or what?
I come from a very conservative family, so you learn to get along with it, right?
So you're the black sheep? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I actually don't disagree with most of the points that you were making, or at least a lot of them.
So why are you a liberal?
If not that. Well, we're in a post-label society, right? No, but what I would say is that I disagree with a lot of your conclusions.
Okay.
For instance, institutional racism.
Yes.
I mean, you can even go back 40, 50 years.
Then there was institutional racism. I'm talking about now.
Yeah.
And I'll freely acknowledge, anyone who doesn't acknowledge there was institutional racism
For sure.
40 or 50 years ago is an idiot, obviously.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I mean, so to then go to the other extreme and to say that there is zero racism, institutional racism or something like that, 40 or 50 years, and I mean the fight for racial equality, I think even the most conservative person wouldn't say that it ended with the repeal of Jim Crow.
No,
40
it didn't end
50
with the
years
repeal of Jim Crow, obviously.
Yeah.
Look at the 70s and the 80s, for
Exactly.
sure. No,
Exactly.
100%.
Yeah.
But there's been,
Absolutely.
as President Obama said, there's been enormous progress. He and I disagree on the level of progress. But,
Yeah.
but here's the question.
Yeah.
When people use it, and I said before I don't like vague terms.
Yeah.
The term institutional racism is vague. The reason I can say there was institutional racism 40 or 50 years ago is because I can name the specific institutions that were racist.
Absolutely.
So if you want to say institutional racism, I need you to tell me which institution is racist, and then we
Yeah.
can go fight it together. The reason I
Yeah,
object to
yeah.
the term is when people say institutional racism, generally it's just an excuse to do nothing and complain. Right?
Sure.
People say institutional racism, that creates poverty, therefore more government. That doesn't wash for me.
And so that makes sense to me. And so what I would say in response to that is that I mean it's you know it can be tough to identify or break down exactly what's going on. I mean, you know,
You see the necessity for doing so, though.
100%. I mean, I also, you know, you're obviously a free enterprise guy. You know, even when you can't necessarily break down things 100%, you still sometimes, you know, have to make a decision. It's sometimes still useful to take action. You know.
Well, you have to identify the problem before you can take proper action.
But so if we accept that the racism problem is not 100% resolved, or something like that. I mean, even just
Yeah,
that,
but again,
you know.
it's too vague a problem. So to say, I agree,
Sure, so
racism
you're
is not
just-
100% resolved. I
so it's
said
just
there are individuals who are
degrees.
racist, but you need to. It's not a matter of degrees. It's a matter of institutions that have been completely taken off the board as racist institutions. So to take Jim Crow as an example,
Yeah.
state governments used to force restaurants
Yeah.
not to allow black people into white areas.
Yeah.
That's no longer the case.
Yeah.
So I can easily say now that those restaurant laws are non-discriminatory.
Sure.
That's an institution that is no longer racist. Right, and that's because that institution had
But
a racist
so-
law, and now that racist law is gone. If you can point to somebody who's a racist, I'm happy to talk about that person and whether they should have that job.
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes sense. Outside of pointing to specific people, that's the only way at this point. As long as the laws are repealed, there is no institutional racism.
You can point to specific
disappears.
institutions too, but I need something to fight. You can't send me out there to fight windmills.
Yeah,
I want to fight
but
racism
so
too,
if
but I
we're-
need
if-
something more
if
than
we're-
windmills.
If we institutional racism, I mean, if we even just expand on the definition of that, even just a tiny bit, just from you know, specific institutions, specific laws, and such, to racism prevalent throughout our institutions.
No, because again, you need to name the institution. It's too vague. I mean, the library is not racist. Like this is a problem. If you go into a doctor
Yeah.
and you say, "I hurt," and the doctor says, "Where?" and you say, "I hurt," doctor's going to have a real tough time coming up with exactly how to cure you.
But that's his job.
No,
and
is it
he
no?
can-
And
he can
it would be
do
unfair.
his
It is
job.
not. It is not the doctor's job to tell you how you hurt. It's your job to tell you
No,
to tell
it's
the
not-
doctor
it's not.
where
It's-
he hurts.
It's 100. So yeah, but all right. So no, and I get what you're saying.
No, it's fine conversation. I just
Yeah,
the
yeah,
problem
good,
is
good.
it's all out there in the ether. So if it can at some level be reduced down to something we can solve. You know,
Yeah.
every problem has to be reduced to something you can solve. Otherwise, it's just bitching.
Absolutely, yeah. And so what I would say is then you're saying that conclusively it's unsolvable unless we concretely
Because I
can pin it down.
don't think that it's asking too much of people. I don't think it's
okay.
random for a doctor to say to you, are you talking about your head or are you talking about your leg? Right? I think that's a perfectly reasonable question for the doctor to ask, and I wouldn't call him a bad doctor who's ignoring the problem if
Yeah.
you just come in and give him a problem that he can't even have a shot at diagnosing.
Yeah, but that's not a perfect analogy either.
No, it
Even-
isn't a perfect
even-
analogy. It's a very rough analogy.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, and so, I mean, just as an example, a mute patient, someone who can't communicate their illness or their problem whatsoever.
But is the implication that the black community is mute, or that the political community here is mute? Because that's
absolutely
not
not.
true.
I'm just making it more vague. Making the problem, identifying the problem, as in your analogy, more difficult.
What I'm
than
saying is
simply
that, but I'm saying
like-
in the past it was not hard to identify the problem.
Yes.
This is the point that I'm making. Why is it so much harder to identify the problem now than it was before?
I mean, and I guess then, you know, as it seems like, you know, it depends on how you're looking at
Because
the
things have been, the answer is because things have been mitigated, and now people struggle to actually identify the problem. So instead, they prefer to talk in vague terms, and then they can invoke government action. That's why.
And so I would say that that's not the only explanation. That isn't the only explanation.
Okay, well, then
maybe there's a legitimate. Maybe it is legitimately
Okay.
difficult to identify that.
and maybe when they legitimately give me a problem I can solve, we can get outside
And
of our
that's fair
identity
enough. That's
politics.
fair
But
enough.
otherwise what it comes down to, and this is an unsolvable problem that divides us all,
Yeah.
is I'm black and I say that there's institutional racism, and I'm not going to describe to you what that means or what that encompasses, but you're just going to have to believe me.
I think
and the answer is no, because we live in a common society.
I think that's an unfair characterization
these
viewpoints that you're talking
Well,
about.
I don't think it's an unfair characterization of a lot of what the Congressional Black Caucus says, for example.
Well, all right. So, in that respect, I think that's.
And I don't mean to cut you off. I think it's been a good conversation, but I think you see where I'm coming from, which is, if you want me to be on your side, which I think I want to be on your side too, because we all want to fight the same thing here.
On your side.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. So all you have to do is give me a solvable problem instead of just putting out there a vague phrase and then expecting that we're going to come to some sort of kumbaya moment, because it ain't happening.
But at least that's a different, it's not incensed rhetoric against,
I don't think it's incensed rhetoric to say that you have to identify the problem. So thank you.
Thank you.
This is crazy. Okay, so I'm going to start off with November 2015. In November 2015, over at Vanderbilt University, something horrible happened. There were a bunch of students there, particularly people of color, and they decided that they were going to be protesting along with this nationwide movement to protest by people of color about how college campuses were racist, terrible places filled with discrimination. And this particular set of students wanted a set of diversity classes, so they did a march to the chancellor's office. The next day, they wake up in the morning, and outside the Black Cultural Center, they find a bag of dog crap. It's a paper bag of dog crap. And this, of course, is the end of the world. And somebody has committed some sort of hate crime. So they released a statement calling the university racist and talking about the isolation of students of color and talking about how this is just pure evidence that Vanderbilt University is a place that is not welcoming to black students. There's only one problem. The police do a full investigation of this whole thing. They find out where the bag of crap came from. It turns out that the bag of crap was put there by a blind girl with a service dog. And the reason that she put it there is because as a blind person walking at night, she couldn't find a trash can. And what you're supposed to do is leave it next to an attended area, some door somewhere, where someone will pick it up and throw it in the garbage. So to the black students who've been protesting the administration say, well, oops. No, instead, they say that this just demonstrates that on this campus, people with disabilities are also marginalized. And this seems to be the general tone and tenor of how things are going on America's college campuses. Everyone is a victim, and you get a certain number of virtue points if you are considered a victim. This is all an outgrowth of a theory called intersectionality, which this seems like a productive university. I mean, I heard you have majors like welding here, so you actually are here to get a job afterward. But at a lot of universities, half the students are majoring in gender studies and lesbian dance theory and all the rest of this. And so those people are particularly interested in victim status. If you have victim status, then you are a hero on campus. You don't actually have to do anything good. You don't have to promulgate good ideas. All you really have to do is be a victim. Everything's about your identity as a human being. And there is, fortunately enough, a hierarchy of victimhood. Because not everybody can be an equal victim. Some victims are more equal than others. So there are some victims who are really high on the scale and some victims who are really low on the scale. So at the top of the scale, you have folks who are LGBT. Folks who are LGBT have the highest number of victim points in this magic Super Mario video game of victimhood. And then after that come black folks. And then after that come Native American folks, and then Hispanic folks, and then females, and then Asians, and then Jews near the bottom. And then down there at the very bottom are the straight white males. Those people are not the victims. Those are the victimizers. Those are the bad guys. Those are the people who are responsible for all the ills in the world. All of the victims are victims, but only victims at the hands of those straight white males. Now, it gets a little more complex because what if you fulfill two of these categories? What if you are you're half Hispanic and you're half black? What happens if you're Barack Obama and you're half black and you're half white? Does your white half victimize your black half? Nobody really knows. It gets very confusing very quickly. But since everyone has a little bit of victimhood, we can all claim that we have a little bit of virtue, and then we can rip the system. Because this is the thing. The system is unfair to everyone. The system has victimized everyone. And if you get to claim victimhood, it means you don't actually have to work hard. It means you don't actually have to achieve. It means you don't have to blame yourself when things go wildly wrong. Right? So long as things are going right, nobody feels the need to do any of this stuff. But if you get a bad grade, and you happen to be a Hispanic person, it's a lot easier to say, I got the bad grade because society victimizes Hispanic people, than it is to say, maybe I should have blown off the frat party and studied. Now, we have not yet discovered, at some point, we'll all have to end democracy. Like the small r republicanism, the republic will have to end, because at some point we will discover the unicorn of intersectionality. And at some point, we'll discover the bisexual, transgender, female little person who's 3/4 black, 1/4 Native American, and disabled. When we find that person will have ultimate moral authority, and we will all have to just bow before her or him. Right? We'll just have to decide this is the person for whom all of the universe was created. This person has been victimized by everyone on the planet, and this person therefore has ultimate moral authority. All the rest of you shut up. We found the unicorn. But we haven't actually found that yet, so instead we have to have a bunch of fights where certain groups tell other groups they have to shut up because they're part of the victim group, and the people who are talking are not part of the victim group, so shut up. Now, all of this is designed, in reality, to do two things. It creates what I like to call, we talk about white privilege a lot, this creates what I like to call victim privilege. Okay, so victim privilege comes along with two privileges. First, you're the only one who gets to talk. And if you watch the Democratic National Committee hearings, they had a bunch of hearings for various candidates who want to be the head of the DNC. There was actually a white lady who got up and she said, it's my job to tell all the other white folks to shut up when we're talking about issues that affect black people. Right, so that's the nice thing about being in one of these victim groups is you get to tell everybody else to shut up, which is nice, because when they shut up, you win. And second, you actually get to hurt people. Because if you're a victim, you get to say that somebody else is the victimizer. Well, if you're the victim of the victimizer, what do you get to do to that person? You get to punch them. You get to do something violent. And that's how you get to the culture on campuses of microaggressions and safe spaces. So apparently, I've heard that every dorm here has a safe space sign. Every RA has a safe space sign on their door here, which is weird since, I mean, you guys all seem relatively safe. I'm not seeing riots. And maybe in Marquette in a couple of days, apparently we will see riots there, but here it seems relatively safe. It seems like you're able to be okay and say what you want to say without people getting beaten down in the snow. And apparently, but I will say that there may be, you'll have to tell me, is it possible there's a political bias when it comes to safe spaces? Because at college campuses across the country, there is. If you're on the left, it's a safe space. If you're on the right, not so much of a safe space. I've heard that there's a professor who put a note on his door and said that President Trump is, quote, a shit sandwich, homophobic, misogynistic, racist ass clown, which I guess means that he didn't get his degree in welding. And another professor here has a picture of Mike Pence labeled American Taliban, which is weird because Mike Pence doesn't have a beard. But the question is, if somebody put up a sign on their door here that said that about Barack Obama, I call him a shit sandwich of a human being, right? Would there be consequences? I assume there probably would, because in most college campuses, the safe space thing only runs one way. And the microaggression thing is designed to make people feel as though they have the right to be offended, even if they really don't have anything to be offended about. So I'm hearing that there was an email sent to all the members of the honor program here, stating the election of Donald Trump has emboldened elements in our society who are dedicated to spreading hate and intolerance, and students should make each other feel comfortable, or else a student may be dismissed from the program when they fail to maintain a record of good citizenship. So my only question is, what does good citizenship mean? If I disagree with you, does that mean that I have violated good citizenship? Is that a microaggression? Because this is how the left has traditionally interpreted microaggressions. Microaggressions, the very term, suggests, number one, that's an aggression. Somebody's aggressed you. And number two, that it's micro. It's like really, really small. So it's not that someone came out and, for example, called you a shit sandwich, racist ass clown. It's that somebody said something like, where are you from? Seriously, on college campuses all over the country, if you say to people, where are you from, this is considered racist. Because it implies that you're not from here, which is racist. It's also stupid, because if I'm talking to you, I assume you weren't born, like, right here, like, on this spot. Where are you from seems to me a fairly normal question, but that's not unusual on campuses. They have full classes devoted to teaching people just how offended they should be, just how they can put themselves in the victim category without even having to be offended, without even having to be a victim. The result of all of this, if you teach people that they are victims, incessantly, if you tell them they are victims of American society, if you tell them they ought to be offended by every single little thing, and then you tell them that them being offended is just a result of aggression, they were microaggressed, the predictable result is violence. And this is what you've actually gotten on some college campuses. So you see a riot over at Berkeley last week because Milo Yiannopoulos says terrible things. Okay, I'm not a Milo Yiannopoulos fan. I'm happy to explain why later. But, I'm sorry, riots are not called for just because you disagree with somebody.